January 18th was never special because of superstition. It was special because of timing. And timing, I learned the hard way, reveals where pressure really sits. When I was deep in sorcery, we didn't wait for fireworks at midnight. We watched for shifts. We watched for moments when people were exhausted enough to stop pretending, quiet enough to hear their own thoughts, and still enough for unresolved things to surface. Midnight was not about darkness, it was about exposure. I remember nights when the room went quiet and everyone's attention locked on the clock. Not because something magical was supposed to happen at Twafai Odrid, but because we knew what often happens inside people after it turns. The day's distractions fall away, the mind loses its filters, the heart gets honest, and whatever someone has been avoiding finally asks to be faced. January 18th marked one of those pressure points. When routines had settled after the new year, resolutions were already tired, and the weight people pushed down during busy days came back up at night. We didn't call it power, we called it vulnerability. What shocked me later, after I walked away from that life, was realizing how many believers misread this hour. They thought the pressure meant attack. They thought the heaviness meant failure. They thought the racing thoughts meant something external was winning. But most of the time, it meant the opposite. It meant the noise was gone. It meant the truth had room to speak. Midnight didn't create fear. It revealed it. Midnight didn't invent doubt. It uncovered it. And once something is uncovered, it can no longer hide behind distraction. That's why this matters. Not because January 18th is mystical. Not because midnight controls your life, but because patterns tell the truth. If anxiety spikes, if regret replays, if old questions resurface when the clock turns, that's not condemnation, it's information. Tonight, I'm not here to hype a date or scare you with an hour. I'm here to give you clarity. Because when you understand what really happens after midnight and why certain nights feel heavier, you stop panicking, stop fighting the wrong battle, and start responding with wisdom. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain why midnight pressure feels stronger during specific seasons, what actually shifts internally, and how understanding that shift takes the fear out of the hour. Stay with me. Awareness changes everything. To understand why the enemy panics at midnight, especially during moments like January 18th, you have to understand what actually collapses when the clock turns. It isn't light versus dark, it's distraction versus truth. During the day, people are protected by motion, noise, deadlines, screens, conversations. Even stress can act like a shield because it keeps the mind busy. But after midnight, that shield drops. The body is tired. The willpower is low. And the mind no longer has the energy to suppress what's unresolved. Inside sorcery, we didn't call this danger. We called it exposure. After midnight, people stop performing. They stop managing impressions. They stop pushing emotions down. And when suppression ends, honesty begins. Regret surfaces. Fear gets louder. Old memories replay. Questions people avoid during daylight suddenly demand attention. This is why midnight pressure doesn't feel logical. It feels emotional, overwhelming, heavy. Thoughts that seemed manageable at noon feel catastrophic at 12:30 a.m. Not because they grew, but because your filters are gone. January 18th sat in a season where this effect intensified. The new year momentum had faded. Goals were already tiring. Motivation was slipping. And people were confronting the gap between who they planned to be and how they actually felt. That gap creates internal tension, and tension always shows up at night. We understood this clearly. Fatigue amplifies emotion. A tired mind cannot accurately assess threat. Fear feels urgent. Loneliness feels permanent. Uncertainty feels fatal. That's why decisions made after midnight are often regretted by morning. Not because midnight is evil, but because exhaustion lies. The enemy doesn't need to create fear in those moments. He only needs to magnify what's already there. If insecurity exists, midnight makes it louder. If shame is buried, midnight digs it up. If doubt is hidden, midnight gives it a microphone. But here's the part that changes everything. Pressure after midnight is not proof you're losing. It's proof something unresolved is being exposed. And exposure is not the enemy of freedom, it's the doorway to it. People panic because they misinterpret exposure as attack. They try to fight thoughts. They try to force sleep. They distract harder. And in doing so, they reinforce the cycle. Fear grows when it's resisted without understanding. Midnight is not demanding answers. It's revealing limits. It's showing you where you're tired of carrying things you were never meant to hold alone. In the next chapter, I'm going to expose the specific patterns that surface after midnight and why recognizing them takes away their authority completely. Because once you can name a pattern, it can no longer control you. And that's when the panic stops. There were 3 patterns we watched for after midnight. Not rituals, not spells, patterns. And once you understand them, the mystery disappears. The first pattern was replay. After midnight, the mind replays conversations, failures, embarrassments, missed opportunities. Moments from years ago suddenly feel fresh. Words spoken casually during the day now feel catastrophic. The brain, exhausted and unguarded, begins scanning for unfinished business. Inside sorcery, we understood something simple. Replay creates emotional intensity, and emotional intensity feels like reality, even when it's distortion. But replay is not revelation. It's the brain attempting to resolve what it never processed properly. When you are tired, your brain cannot distinguish between memory and current threat. So it reacts as if the past is happening again. That's why your heart races at 2:40 a.m. over something that didn't bother you at 20:00 p.m. The second pattern was magnification. Small concerns become enormous. Financial stress feels like collapse. A disagreement feels like abandonment. A delay feels like destiny closing. Fatigue removes proportion. When I left that life and studied psychology and spiritual disciplines, honestly, I realized something sobering. What we once framed as spiritual attack was often cognitive distortion amplified by exhaustion. Midnight doesn't create disaster, it removes your ability to measure it correctly. And here's the key: magnification loses power when you question scale. Ask yourself at 12:30 a.m., will this feel the same at 90 orders a.m.? Most of the time, it won't. The third pattern was identity accusation. This one is the most dangerous. After midnight, the mind stops saying, I made a mistake, and starts saying, I am a mistake. It shifts from behavior to identity, from event to worth. That's the hour when shame tries to rename you. We knew this was the breaking point for many people. Because once someone accepts an accusation about their identity, their decisions begin to align with that label. And labels are powerful. But here's what exposure taught me after I walked away. Accusations thrive in vagueness. If the thought is, you'll never change, ask, what specifically needs change? If the thought is, you're failing, ask, in what measurable way? If the thought is, you're alone, ask, is that objectively true? Clarity shrinks fear. Midnight pressure survives in the dark of undefined thoughts. Once you define them, they weaken. January 18th, or any night that feels heavier, is not a signal that the enemy is stronger. It's often a signal that your distractions are weaker. And when distractions weaken, unresolved patterns surface. That is not doom. That is opportunity. Because once you recognize replay, magnification, and identity accusation for what they are, fatigue, driven distortions, they stop feeling mystical and start feeling manageable. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain why the enemy panics when you stay calm at midnight and what happens internally when you refuse to react to the pressure. Because that calm, that's the turning point. This is the part no one told you. The enemy does not panic because it's midnight. He panics when you don't. When I was inside that world, fear was fuel, reaction was leverage, emotional chaos was opportunity. If someone spiraled after midnight, if they sent the desperate text, made the impulsive decision, believed the accusation, numbed themselves with distraction, that reaction created momentum. And momentum is powerful. But when someone stayed still, when someone breathed instead of reacting, when someone questioned the thought instead of obeying it, when someone chose rest instead of panic, everything stalled because pressure without reaction collapses. After midnight, the body is tired, the nervous system is sensitive, thoughts feel louder than they are, and the temptation is always the same: do something right now. Fix it, decide it, escape it, silence it. But urgency at 12:37 a.m. is rarely wisdom, it's agitation, and agitation wants movement. I remember watching people undo progress in one exhausted hour. Relationships ended over thoughts that would have softened by morning. Opportunities were abandoned because doubt felt convincing in the dark. Promises were broken because shame felt permanent. The enemy doesn't need long-term control. He just needs one impulsive reaction. But when you stay calm, something powerful happens internally. Your nervous system begins to regulate. Your breathing slows. Your thinking regains proportion. And the thought that felt like a storm begins to shrink into something measurable. Calm is not passive. Calm is strategic. When you refuse to react at midnight, you deny fear the movement it depends on. You force the pressure to sit without being fed, and unfed pressure weakens. January 18th, or any night that feels heavier than usual, becomes a test of posture, not power. The question is not, why is this happening? The question is, will I move because I'm tired, or will I wait because I'm wise? There is strength in postponement. Tell yourself, I will not make permanent decisions in temporary exhaustion. I will not accept identity labels in the dark. I will revisit this in the morning. You would be shocked how many midnight battles dissolve by daylight. Because the enemy's advantage is distortion, and distortion cannot survive clarity. When you remain steady, when you observe instead of react, when you let the clock move without letting your emotions drag you with it, that is when panic shifts sides, not yours, his. In the final chapter, I'm going to show you what to do practically when midnight pressure rises, how to turn that hour from vulnerability into strength, and how to walk into morning with authority instead of regret. Because midnight is not your enemy. Unexamined reaction is.